When the Celestari Confederation collapsed, no one wept. Their shining spires, once a testament to 10,000 years of dominance, cracked and fell into the dust. The vast fleets that had dominated entire star clusters drifted in silence, power cores long since drained, their shimmering banners hanging like tattered ghosts in vacuum. The stars themselves seemed to sigh in relief as the final transmission from the Celestari capital went silent, a single, sterile ping echoing across the deep. The Celestari were masters of control, of order without warmth, of conquest without mercy. Their descendants, the Valyr Dominion and the Orithel Concord, each took up the torch in turn, each falling to the same flaw. They understood how to command, but never how to inspire. Over centuries, entire species were reduced to slaves or numbers, their cultures absorbed into the collective machinery of empire. Planets became engine parts. Art became propaganda. Laughter was forbidden. Noise was seen as disorder, an echo of primitive chaos. When the final palace on Valyr Prime crumbled, entire systems simply shut down. Leaders who had never learned to live without hierarchy wandered in shock among the empty halls. Their empires had always been held together by fear and rigid discipline. Once those threads snapped, no one knew how to move, or even how to speak above a whisper. Among these silent ruins landed a single human shuttle, battered, scorched from micrometeor impacts, patched together with scrap plating and painted in wild, mismatched colors. From it stepped Mara Chen, the first human to set foot on Valyr Prime in generations. She was short, freckled, her hair tied in a wild tangle behind her head, wearing a patched flight suit covered in old campaign badges and grease smears. In one hand she carried a small pack, and in the other a battered old radio, dangling from a frayed strap. She stepped through the grand archways, looking up at the fallen crystal mosaics and shattered statues of emperors long forgotten. Her footsteps echoed through avenues once filled with armored processions and chanting soldiers. She could hear the whispers of the few remaining sentients, the ones who had hidden in tunnels or beneath collapsed towers, peeking out at her with wide, terrified eyes. Mara tilted her head, listening to the deep hush that had swallowed the entire city. She reached into her pack and pulled out a small solar charger, plugging it into her old radio. As static crackled and the device whirred to life, she grinned, the first true smile that city had seen in centuries. Then she pressed play. Music burst out, wild, chaotic, joyful. Brass horns and thundering drums, guitars shredding like lightning strikes. Mara threw her head back and laughed, a bright, unstoppable sound that rolled out across the plazas and towers, bouncing off shattered walls and dancing across broken bridges. The remaining Valyr survivors flinched at first, pressing their hands over their sensitive ears, expecting a weapon or a command. But then they peeked out again. Her laughter didn't carry threat, it carried warmth. It carried something they had never heard before, life unbound. Mara danced across the cracked tiles, slipping between toppled columns, her laugh mixing with the music. She sang lyrics that meant nothing to them, but shook the dust from the stones. A young Valyr child, thin, with eyes like pale moons, stepped cautiously forward, trembling. Mara saw her, dropped to one knee, and held out a hand. The child flinched again, but Mara just smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hey kid," she said, her voice warm and rough. "You want to dance?" The child looked around at the silent ruins, at the terrified elders peeking from doorways. For the first time in her short life, she felt a pulse in her chest that wasn't fear, it was something sharp and electric. Slowly, hesitantly, she stepped forward and took Mara's hand. Mara pulled her in, swinging her around in a clumsy, joyous spin. The child let out a thin sound at first, a squeak, and then, as the music rose, a bubbling giggle that turned into full, echoing laughter. It rang up the towers, across the rooftops, into the silent hearts of all who listened. One by one, others emerged. Mothers holding children, old warriors leaning on broken spears, engineers in soot-stained uniforms. They watched Mara, listened to the impossible sound of human joy, and something cracked open inside them. Some covered their mouths at first, trying to muffle unfamiliar snorts of amusement. Others began to sway to the beat. A few dared to stomp a foot, then another, until the entire plaza began to tremble. Hours passed, and the music never stopped. Mara's radio, old as it was, had enough songs for 100 days. As the stars began to rise over Valyr Prime, the once sterile air now hummed with laughter and clumsy dancing. Mara climbed atop a broken statue and looked out at the gathering. She saw tears on many faces, but also smiles, raw, awkward, untrained smiles that ached from disuse. She raised her hands and shouted, "This is what it means to be free. Not just to live, but to laugh. To be loud, to be wrong, to be gloriously alive." They answered with a cheer, shaky at first, then rising into a storm that shook the silent empire to its bones. That night, fires flickered across the city, not the cold blue furnace lights of industry, but orange and gold, warm and flickering, around which Valier families gathered to tell stories and sing new songs. In the days that followed, the once quiet ruins began to echo with human voices and laughter. Gardens appeared in the cracks of old plazas. Children played tag among the toppled statues. The Valier discovered that art could exist without propaganda, that stories could be told without fear, that laughter could mend even the deepest fractures of an empire's soul. Their empires had fallen quiet, thinking silence meant control, that emotion was weakness. But in the end, it was a human's laugh that taught them how to rise again, not as subjects of an empire, but as a people truly alive.